The first time my mom said my baby would be better off calling my sister Mama, I felt something inside me snap. I was only 21 years old and 4 months pregnant, barely keeping myself together in a cramped apartment in Toledo, Ohio. My family had already decided that my baby wasn't mine. To them, I was just the inconvenient womb carrying what they thought belonged to my sister, Rachel. She was 33, married to a polished lawyer with money to burn, and, most importantly, infertile. She'd always been the golden child, the perfect daughter with perfect grades, perfect vacations, perfect hair. The only thing missing from her picture-perfect life was the baby they wanted to rip out of mine. At first, they tried to wear me down slowly. They brought stacks of adoption paperwork to Sunday dinners, sliding them across the table like menus. My dad kept repeating how I was too young to do this on my own. Rachel smiled with that tight, rehearsed grin of hers and told me I didn't want to look into my child's eyes and see my ex, the same ex who had left bruises on me more times than I could count. They thought mentioning him would break me. Instead, it lit a fire. So I gave birth alone, without them. I held my son in my arms and swore no one was going to take him. For 10 months, my family were ghosts. No calls. No visits. Not even a knock on the door. For a while, I thought maybe they'd finally let it go. But then the diagnosis came. When my baby boy was 10 months old, his pediatrician gently told me he was on the autism spectrum. I remember gripping the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't feel fear, just determination. But when I told my family, thinking they might finally back off, they didn't hear autism. They heard opportunity. Rachel showed up at my studio apartment the very next morning with a stack of printed articles about therapy costs. She flipped through them like a professor giving a lecture, explaining that specialized care could cost thousands of dollars a month. "You know you can't afford this," she said sweetly. Then, with a practiced flourish, she pulled framed certificates out of her oversized purse, mommy classes, sensory room training, and God knows what else. She lined them up on my chipped kitchen counter like trophies. I just stood there, frozen, listening to her tell me that keeping my baby was basically child abuse. That's when my mother started slithering back into my life too. After nearly a year of silence, she suddenly appeared at my door every other day, acting like she just wanted to help out. One afternoon, I walked out of the bathroom and found her holding my son while pointing at Rachel's photo, whispering the word "Mama" into his ear again and again like she was training him. My stomach turned. But I couldn't shut them out completely. I was working double shifts at a diner just to cover therapy sessions. I couldn't afford a babysitter. They knew that. And Rachel wasted no time exploiting it. On her very first day babysitting, she swore up and down she respected me as his mother. She smiled so earnestly that, for a second, I almost believed her. Almost. Because I had already tucked a nanny cam inside his favorite stuffed bear. For 3 weeks, everything looked normal. She followed my rules. She played with him. She fed him on time. And for 3 weeks, I let myself breathe. Until that Wednesday. I was wiping down tables at work when my phone rang. It was my building manager. She said police were outside my apartment about an abandoned baby. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I don't remember the drive home, just the sound of sirens in my head and the burn of the steering wheel under my sweaty palms. When I got there, 2 officers were pounding on my door, ready to break it down. They cuffed me before I could even speak. Then they called the closest thing to a legal guardian, my sister, and asked her if she could take the baby for the day. In that moment, I thought my whole world was ending. At the station, they wouldn't listen to a word I said. Not until I demanded my phone and pulled up the nanny cam footage. And there it was, Rachel leaving my baby alone in my apartment for half an hour, timestamped clear as day. The officers let me go, but their warning echoed in my head, "Watch out for her." I wish I could say that was the worst of it. But that night, staring at the teddy bear camera on my couch, I knew deep down, this was just the beginning. The days after that police call felt like living under a microscope. My family moved like shadows, circling, watching, documenting. Every meltdown my son had, every cry, every stim, every flicker of his emotions, they twisted into evidence against me. If he cried when the sunlight hit his eyes, they whispered about abuse. If he startled at the sudden blare of the TV, they claimed I was negligent. One night, after a 16-hour shift at the diner, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried from exhaustion. The next week, I saw clips of myself, edited, stripped of context, posted to neighbors, family friends, even strangers. My grief had become their weapon. Then came the custody petition. It hit me like a physical blow, a thick stack of papers served at my door, stamped with the cold authority of the court. Rachel's husband, smooth-talking, tailored suit, every word dripping with the power of his law firm, had built a case against me. He claimed I'd abandoned my son. Claimed I couldn't provide for his medical needs. He even included evidence that I was mentally unstable, citing my breakdowns after work as proof I was unfit. I flipped through those 47 pages with trembling hands. There were statements from neighbors taken out of context. Photos of my baby crying. Rachel's certificates. Even notes about how I didn't smile enough. They painted me as a danger to my own child. And then came the gut punch. The father of my child, the same man who once said he'd rather beat our kid than raise him, walked into that courtroom as if he was a hero. This was the man who'd signed away his rights for $500, and now, suddenly, he wanted what was best for his son. When I saw him smirking on the other side of the courtroom, I felt my chest cave in. I thought I was finished. I had scraped together the cheapest lawyer in Lucas County, a man who shuffled papers like he'd rather be anywhere else. I walked into court after another double shift, uniform still smelling of grease, hair barely brushed. My sister Rachel, meanwhile, walked in radiant, hair perfect, pearls shining, like she'd already won. But then, for the first time in months, I felt something crack through the fog. My son's pediatrician, Dr. Simmons, stepped up. She testified about his progress in therapy. She spoke about how much I did, how committed I was. And then, with a look that told me she was risking her career, she admitted that Rachel had called her office 47 times, demanding my son's medical records and even threatening her staff when they refused. For once, it wasn't my word against theirs. When I took the stand, I pulled out the nannycam footage, the same one that had saved me from the police station. This time, the judge actually watched it. This time, I saw Rachel's face crumble as the truth spilled across the courtroom. And then came the twist I'll never forget. My neighbor, the same one Rachel had tried to bribe, walked into that courtroom with a calm, steady voice. She testified that Rachel had offered her money to lie about me. And when my ex took the stand, under oath, the smug mask finally cracked. He admitted they'd paid him to show up. The entire room shifted. The judge's face darkened. She called it what it was, a coordinated attempt to steal a child. Immediate restraining orders were issued against Rachel, my mother, my father, and anyone connected to their scheme. Rachel's scream cut through the courtroom like glass, "You're wasting him. He was meant for me." Security had to drag her out while my mother sobbed about me destroying our family. When I walked out of that courtroom, my knees almost gave out. I thought I had survived the worst. I thought maybe, finally, it was over. But I should have known better. Because less than a week later, as I was changing the locks on my new apartment in Dayton, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find them all, Rachel, my ex, my mother, every face I thought the court had silenced, standing there with fresh custody papers in hand. And the smile on Rachel's face told me that the war was only beginning. When the custody petition landed in my hands, it didn't feel like paper. It felt like a weapon. 47 pages. That's how long Rachel's husband's case against me was. Page after page of twisted half-truths and fabricated lies. They had statements from neighbors who claimed to hear my son cry for hours. They had blurry photos of him mid-meltdown, captioned as evidence of neglect. They even included pictures of me sitting on my kitchen floor, head in my hands after a 16-hour shift, calling it proof that I was unstable. I didn't even remember anyone taking those pictures. The first night I read through it, I vomited twice in my bathroom and sat against the tub until my legs went numb. My hands shook so hard, I dropped the papers more than once. They'd built a reality where I was a monster, and Rachel was a savior waiting in the wings. And as if that wasn't enough, when the first court hearing came, he showed up. My ex. The same man who once told me he'd put the kid through a wall if I ever forced him to play dad. The same man who signed away his rights for $500 cash. He walked into that courtroom like he was the hero of the story, chin high, voice smooth, saying he only wanted what was best for his son. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there in my wrinkled diner uniform, hair pulled into a messy bun, beside the cheapest lawyer I could scrape together in Lucas County. Rachel sat across from me in pearls and heels, her husband whispering strategy in her ear like a general preparing for battle. I thought I was finished. But then, a lifeline. Dr. Simmons, my son's pediatrician, walked into that courtroom with a stack of charts in her hands. She spoke calmly, clearly, about his progress, about the therapy sessions I'd worked double shifts to afford. And then, under oath, she revealed something that made the entire courtroom shift in their seats. Rachel had called her office 47 times, demanding my son's medical records, even threatening her staff when they refused. For the first time, their mask slipped. And I wasn't done. When it was my turn, I pulled out the nannycam footage, the same video that had kept me out of jail weeks earlier. I watched the judge's face harden as the time-stamped recording showed Rachel leaving my baby alone in my apartment for over half an hour. No excuses. No editing. Just the truth. Rachel's smile cracked. But it wasn't until my neighbor took the stand that I felt the tide truly shift. She testified that Rachel had tried to bribe her into lying about me, offering cash for false statements. And then my ex, the smug smirk plastered on his face, cracked under oath. Pressed with questions, he admitted they'd paid him to show up. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. The judge's voice cut through it like a knife. This was a coordinated attempt to steal a child. Restraining orders were issued immediately. Against Rachel. Against my parents. Against my ex. Rachel lost it. She leapt to her feet, screaming that I was wasting him, that he was meant for her. Security dragged her out while my mom sobbed about how I was destroying the family. I just sat there, frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the gavel. Walking out of that courthouse, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. But peace doesn't last long in my family. 5 days later, I was at my new apartment in Dayton, screwing in deadbolts, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find them all. Rachel, my ex, my mother. And in his hands, fresh custody papers dated weeks before the restraining order even existed. Rachel stood behind him, phone raised, recording. The same smile stretched across her face. And in that moment, I knew the court victory wasn't the end. It was only round one. The night they showed up with those custody papers, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, clutching a kitchen knife I knew I probably couldn't use. Every creak of the pipes, every passing car outside made my skin prickle. By morning, my body felt like it had been chewed up and spit out. I thought I'd hit bottom. But I hadn't. Not even close. Because what happened next, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. It started small. My mom showing up outside my apartment just to check in. Rachel sending texts about how my baby wasn't safe with me. But then, things shifted. I came home one afternoon and found my son's closet door slightly ajar, and inside were brand new clothes, with tags still attached. Clothes I hadn't bought. Someone had been in my apartment. I told myself maybe I'd just forgotten buying them. Maybe stress was making me forget. But deep down, I knew. And then one day, the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It was pounding. When I opened the door, there they were again, Rachel, my ex, and my mom, all with that same rehearsed calmness that set my nerves on fire. My mom shoved her way into the doorway, wailing about how the doctors had given her terrible news, flashing a hospital bracelet that still had the sticker shine of something straight from the packaging. "Just let me see my grandson one last time," she cried, while Rachel filmed everything on her phone, narrating that I was unstable, maybe even under the influence. My son started crying from his bedroom. The sound hit Rachel like blood in the water. Her whole face shifted. Without hesitation, she shoved past me like she owned the place, heading straight for his room. How did she know which door it was? My stomach dropped. She'd been here before. I tried to block my ex from following her, but he shifted his body like a wall, moving every time I tried to squeeze past. It was like he was playing some sick game, guarding the hallway with his shoulders and smirk. By the time I forced my way around him, Rachel had my son in her arms. She was swaying back and forth, whispering, "Mama's here now. Your real mama's here." He cried harder. My mom stood in the doorway, still filming, narrating that I had left my baby crying alone, that I was a neglectful addict. I reached for my phone to call 911, but my ex grabbed it, yanked it out of my hand, and tossed it to Rachel's husband, who I hadn't even realized was in the apartment until he stepped out of my bathroom like he lived there. He held up photos of drug paraphernalia, except it was just my prescription anxiety meds, bottles with doctored labels showing triple the dosage I was prescribed. Fake evidence. Planted in my own home. And then I realized they'd been inside before. That's when the icy truth settled in. This whole ambush had been rehearsed. The commotion drew neighbors. Doors opened, eyes peeked out, whispers spread down the hallway. Rachel raised her voice, waving the fake photos like a trophy. "We're here to save this baby from his drug-addicted mother," she shouted. "She leaves him alone for hours." Her voice carried. The neighbors' eyes narrowed. Some pulled their kids back inside. One slammed a door so hard the frame rattled. And right on cue, the police arrived. But instead of listening to me, they listened to them. Rachel's husband smoothly presented the custody papers. My ex showed fake text messages from me about using drugs. Rachel played spliced videos on her phone, edited to make it look like I'd attacked them at the door. The officer barely glanced at the restraining order I shoved at him on my laptop. He seemed annoyed I was even trying to argue. By the end of it, the officer announced there would be an emergency custody hearing the next morning. Until then, my son would stay with Rachel. She already had a car seat waiting in her SUV. I watched from the doorway as she strapped my screaming baby into the car, her face calm, smug, victorious. My mom whispered in my ear that this was for the best, her breath heavy with wine even though it wasn't noon yet. When the SUV pulled away, my knees buckled. I didn't even notice the eviction notice being taped to my door until my landlord muttered that he couldn't have drug activity in his building. In less than 24 hours, I had lost my baby, my home, and whatever shred of dignity I had left. But I hadn't lost the one thing Rachel and her perfect little team didn't count on. I still had the truth. And I was ready to burn every last one of them with it. I thought the worst night of my life was watching Rachel drive off with my screaming son. But the truth? That was nothing compared to what came next. The next morning, I stood in the courthouse bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was greasy, my uniform wrinkled from sleeping in my car. My eyes were bloodshot from crying and being woken up all night by cops checking reports that I was using drugs in a vehicle. I looked exactly like the addict Rachel had been painting me as. And when I walked into that courtroom, Rachel looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly pressed dress, pearls, her legal team surrounding her like knights. She even had poster boards with enlarged photos of the fake evidence they'd planted in my apartment. I had no lawyer. No one would take my case. Rachel's husband had made sure of it. The hearing started with their side, 72 hours of documentation, fabricated reports, spliced videos. A psychological evaluation with details that only family could have provided, painting me as unstable, self-medicating, and dangerous. My ex cried on the stand about trying to help me get clean. He'd never even been to my new apartment, but he swore he'd seen drug paraphernalia there. His voice cracked so perfectly it almost convinced me. Every time I tried to speak, they had 3 new pieces of evidence to bury me under. The judge's face stayed stone cold. And then Rachel walked into the courtroom with my son in her arms. He clung to her shirt, his face red from crying. He didn't recognize the woman holding him, and every sob from him stabbed into my chest like a blade. When the judge granted Rachel temporary custody, I collapsed on the courthouse steps. My baby was being taken from me in plain sight, while reporters shoved cameras in my face and whispered unfit mothers under their breath. I thought it was over. But then something happened that none of us expected. Back in the courtroom 2 weeks later, Rachel tried too hard. My son started melting down from the noise and the crowd, the way autistic kids do when overwhelmed. Instead of using any of the calming techniques I'd taught her, she snapped. Right there in front of the judge, she shook him hard and yelled at him to stop crying. The entire courtroom froze. The court reporter's hands hung midair. The bailiff shifted forward, unsure whether to step in. And then my ex's new girlfriend, someone I barely knew, stood up and blurted out that Rachel had been drugging my baby with adult doses of melatonin just to keep him quiet. She held out her phone with texts Rachel had sent her, asking her to buy more sleep aid than any toddler should ever take. Rachel's face twisted, wild and desperate, and I swear for a second she didn't even look human. The judge's gavel slammed down. He called a recess, but the tension didn't lift. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until then. Rachel wasn't just trying to take my son. She was willing to destroy him to make him hers. And as I sat there, clutching the edge of the table so hard my nails bent back, I knew the storm was about to break wide open. When the judge called recess, Rachel stormed out, dragging my son with her. I followed, but she cornered me in the women's bathroom before I could even reach him. Her nails dug into my arm so hard I knew they'd bruise. Her voice dropped to a hiss, "Make that girl recant, or your baby will pay for it." Her perfect makeup was smeared, her pearls askew. I could see faint scratch marks on her neck. My son had been fighting her, even in her arms. By the time we went back into the courtroom, my heart was pounding so loud I couldn't hear my own footsteps. And then, the doors banged open. My old neighbor burst in, clutching her laptop. She looked pale, shaking, but determined. She'd gone back through months of her doorbell camera footage. On the screen, clear as day, was Rachel slipping into my old apartment in the middle of the night. Planting things. Taking photos. The timestamp was ironclad. The same night before the first CPS report. The judge's face went white. When he ordered immediate custody returned to me, Rachel lost whatever was left of her grip on reality. She clutched my son so tightly he screamed in pain. She shouted that I was going to kill him, that I didn't deserve him, that she was the only real mother he had. The bailiff stepped forward, but even he hesitated. No one wanted to be the one to pry a baby out of her arms. Her husband tried to calm her, but she turned on him, too, screaming that he hadn't done enough to secure their son. And then she tried to run. In the chaos, she tripped. Her head hit the corner of the defense table with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. She collapsed, unconscious, as my son scrambled across the floor into my arms. Everything after blurred, paramedics rushing in, her husband shouting that I'd killed her, my mother finally breaking and confessing everything to police. She had secret recordings on her phone, Rachel threatening her, coercing her, admitting she'd rather see my son dead than raised by me. Even my ex cracked, confessing he'd been paid to testify. He showed the bank transfers from Rachel's husband's law firm, each payment disguised as consulting fees. It was all there. The money trail. The lies. The conspiracy. Rachel never woke up. Hours later, in the hospital, she died from a brain hemorrhage. Her husband tried one last trick, serving me with a wrongful death lawsuit dated the day before she even fell. But by then, no one believed him. He was arrested, along with the rest of my family, on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted kidnapping. I should have felt relief. But when I looked down at my son, curled against my chest, thumb in his mouth, all I felt was grief. Because every bruise, every meltdown, every confused cry in that courtroom had been the cost of their obsession. 6 months later, our lives looked different. I moved us to a new city where no one knows our names. I work now as an advocate for parents fighting custody battles, teaching them how to recognize the warning signs I missed until it was almost too late. My son is thriving. Therapy, support, love, all the things he needed, all the things only I could give him. Rachel's husband sits in prison, my mother is on probation, and I'm just trying to rebuild. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear Rachel's voice in my head, he was meant for me. And no matter how many locks I change, or how many walls I build, it leaves me with one final thought I can't shake. If your own family can do this to you, who can you ever really trust?